Hi everybody, welcome to my homestead and welcome to my channel. My name is Jared. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe. So a lot of you have let me know that Maria Branyas Morera died at the age of 117, and she was the oldest living person. And so why do I care about that? If you're new to the channel, why does this matter? I don't know that it does, but it does play into something that I've been thinking about. There's a prophecy from Joseph Smith where he prophesied about a particular generation that would be here to see the second coming. And so I tend to think that Maria's generation could be that generation. So if you're new to this concept, where do I get this from? Well, if you ever need to refer to it again, I have this spreadsheet called Quotes, Rising Generation. You scroll all the way down to the bottom because this is a timeline. And this is the first quote that I have that's generation specific, and it's from Joseph Smith himself. Now, we're going to read this quote from Mormon Doctrine by Elder Bruce R. McConkie because he has a commentary about this. And I'll show you how it goes. So, number 11, the generation of our Lord's return. True it is that the day and hour of our Lord's coming are and will remain unknown, such being an incentive to all to watch and to be ready at all times. But true it also is that those who watch for that great and dread day are expected to read the signs of the times so as to know the approximate time of his coming. President Wilford Woodruff taught that we do know the generation when he will come. Quote, this is from Joseph Smith. And this is the quote. I was once praying very earnestly to know the time of the coming of the Son of Man. The prophet Joseph Smith recorded on April 2nd, 1843. When I heard a voice repeat the following, Joseph, my son, if thou livest until thou art 85 years old, thou shalt see the face of the Son of Man. Therefore, let this suffice, and trouble me no more on this matter. I was thus left without being able to decide whether this coming referred to the beginning of the millennium or to some previous appearing, or whether I should die and thus see his face. I believe the coming of the Son of Man will not be any sooner than that time. 4 days later, April 6th, 1843, at the General Conference of the church. So he said that Joseph Smith said this in General Conference. While the Spirit rested upon him, the prophet said, were I going to prophesy, I would say the end would not come in 1844, 5, or 6, or in 40 years. Now here's the key part right here. There are those of the rising generation who shall not taste death till Christ comes. Okay, so you might think, well, this was a long time ago, 1843. Are there any of the rising generation still alive today? Well, let's see what Elder Bruce R. McConkie says. The rising generation is the one that just begun. Thus, technically, children born on April 6th, 1843 would be the first members of the rising generation. And all children born however many years later to the same parents would still be members of that same rising generation. It is not unreasonable to suppose that many young men had babies at the time of this prophecy and also had other children as much as 50 or 75 years later, assuming, for instance, that they were married again to younger women. This very probable assumption would bring the date up to, say, the second decade in the 20th century. So we are now, you guys, just a little bit past that, right? The second decade would be, so the first decade would be the 2000s, the second decade would be the 2010s. And we're just at the beginning or almost halfway through the third decade. And the children so born would be members of that same rising generation of which the prophet spoke. Now, if these children live to the normal age of men, generally, they would be alive well past the year 2000 AD. So we're going to look a little bit more closely at this in just a minute. Just a little bit more. This reasoning takes on added significance when considering in connection with the revelation, which states categorically that Christ will come, quote unquote, in the beginning of the 7,000 years of Earth's temporal continuance. We know, of course, we of course do not know exactly how many years elapsed between Adam and the birth of Christ, but suppose it to have been 4004, like the year 4004 BC. Nor can we be certain from historical sources how many years have passed since, but reading these inspired statements in connection with the signs of the times, which we can interpret, it is plain that the day of the coming of the Son of Man is not far distant. And this book, I think, was written this says 1979. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's look at this timeline. So in case that was hard to follow, and the first few times that I talked about this on the channel, I mess it up miserably. Okay, so here's the year 1843. Here's the quote from Joseph Smith, and in columns G and H is a hypothetical parent that had a child at that time in that year. Okay, so, and we're going to pretend that it's a male. So say that an 18-year-old man fathered a child in that year, on the day or sometime after Joseph Smith made this statement. Okay, so you would have this child that would be part of the rising generation in columns I and J in green. And you go up, okay, up, 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 up. And then, say later in life, this original parent, the one that had this child when he was 18 years old, say that he had another wife later on in life. Maybe it was a plural wife, or maybe it was just someone that he married later on. And then say that he had a child with her at this time. So say that he had the child at 82 years old. Well, that would be the year that Maria Branyas Morera was born. This person that we're talking about right here. I'm not saying that she had any parents that old, but I'm just showing that you do have people from that time range that could have been born to 80-year-olds, 90-year-olds. And if you think that it's silly that a man that late in life would have children, it's not. Let me show you. If you go to Wikipedia, there's this article called "List of Oldest Fathers," and the oldest one that they have on here was 101 years old from the United States, 96 years old India, 94 years old United States, 93 Italy, 92 Australia, 92 Palestine. You know, and then you have just like a whole list of them. Here's one from Israel, 88 years old. So, and then I've referenced this article before from the Washington Post. Al Pacino, Charlie Chaplin, and history's most famous old dads. So it's not unheard of. It does happen. And this is obviously not like a comprehensive list. There's probably many, many others that we don't know about just because there's not really any record. Maybe they lived in a country where it just wasn't noted, recorded, whatever, didn't make the news. So you get what I'm saying here? So let's go back here. So the age that we're looking at is 82 years old. I just thought about this just now. Let me go back and reference this. So here's the first 82-year-old. And above him you have, I don't know, something like 20 other fathers. So him plus, about 20 other people older than him that have had children. Okay. So that's kind of interesting. Now, the next person, now that Maria has passed away, the next oldest living person is Tamiko Ituka. We're going to look at more of that in just a minute here. If we continue on, you'll see that President Nelson was born in 1924. And so this hypothetical parent would have been 99 years old. And again, I'm not saying that President Nelson's parents were that old. I know that they weren't. But you could see how President Nelson could be part of this generation. Like his contemporaries could have been born to such a parent. Does that make sense? So it's just kind of interesting that President Nelson would have been alive at a time that this hypothetical parent could have had a child around this time. Maybe that's why President Nelson's age is so important. Again, not because of his own parents, but just the generation that he represents. Does it make sense? So at the time that he was born, Tamiko, the current oldest living person, was 16 years old, and Maria Branyas Morera was 17. All right. And then over here to the right in columns Q, R, S, and T, this is James Bolan. He was a Civil War veteran. And interestingly, he was born the year that Joseph Smith said this. So he was born, lived his life, served in the Civil War. And then when he was 76, when he was 76, Helen Viola Jackson was born. And the two of them married when he was 93 and she was 17. The reason why they got married, I already did a video about this, but he had like a pension, I guess, from the military. He was getting paid through the VA, and he didn't want that benefit to just go to waste. And so there was this girl that worked on his farm, and he's like, hey, if we like just technically get married, I can pass this on to you. And then after I die, you can keep collecting this benefit. And so that's what they did. They didn't have any children together, but I just want to, illustrate that could have happened. 93 years old, 17 years old. He lived until he was 96. She was 20 years old when he passed away. But the reason why I know about them is because it made news, because this was the longest, how do you say it? Like the longest running, benefit. So in other words, there was somebody in the year 2020 that was still collecting benefits from the Civil War in the year 2020, collecting a pension from a veteran of the Civil War in 2020. That's reality. Truth is stranger than fiction. Okay. Now the next thing to think about, well, no, before we pass on to that. So let me just read the articles that I have pulled up. So ABC News, Maria Branyas Morera, the world's oldest person, dies at age 117. This article is from August 20th. So just a couple days ago. A woman classified by Guinness World Records as the oldest person in the world died on August 19th, which, by the way, that was the day of the super blue moon. I'm not going to go over that here, but if you missed it, go watch that video, because President Nelson has had some very special things going on during his presidency in relation to the moon. Both solar eclipses, which involve the moon, as well as lunar. Well, I didn't cover lunar eclipses, but there was the first ever election day blood moon just 2 years ago. It was national elections, not for the presidency, but other national elections. And and then you've had these blue moons that have been associated with other lunar events at the same time, like supermoons and lunar eclipses. So it's just interesting that the day that she died, it was during one of President Nelson's super blue moons. So anyway, died on August 19th at the age of 117. Her family confirmed to the New York Times. According to Guinness World Records, Maria Branyas Morera died in Spain at the Residencia Santa Maria del Tura nursing home in Olot, Catalonia, where she has lived since 2000. Guinness World Records passed on the title of oldest woman living to Branyas Morera when Lucille Randon, a nun, also known as Sister Andre, died in 2023 at the age of 118. We're going to come back to that in just a minute, because that's also an interesting thing. Okay, so now this is the new oldest living person. 116-year-old Tamiko Ituka born on the 23rd of May, 1908, is now the world's oldest living woman and oldest living person following the death of 117-year-old Maria Branyas Morera. Tamiko is currently the 24th oldest person in recorded history, so out of all that have ever been recorded, living or dead. The oldest person ever authenticated was Jean Calment of France, who lived to the age of 122 years and 164 days. So that's the record to beat, if it can be beaten. Okay, so this is where we're at right now. Like I pointed out, I have Tamiko now on this spreadsheet, and I'm going to delete these columns with Maria Branyas Morera. So now we're going to be looking at her. And if we scroll down, again, they're just a year apart. So we're essentially looking at the same thing. Not a whole lot has changed in that respect. Now, you might be like, well, this is a really big stretch. Like, this probably doesn't mean anything. Tamiko's parents probably weren't, like her father probably wasn't in his 80s or 90s. And there may not be anybody else in the world that would fit that description. And that could be true. I don't know. One thing that I've thought about is Joseph Smith. Let's see. Joseph Smith, when he says that there are those living that would see Christ, I can't remember how he worded it. Let me go back here. There are those of the rising generation who shall not taste death till Christ comes. Well, we know that the second coming is a process, right? I just recently did a video where President Holland said that the second coming started with the first vision, and that it's been ongoing since that time. We've also talked about Adam on Diamond and how, in fact, it's Elder Bruce R. McConkie who talks about the fact that Adam on Diamond is going to be split up into sessions. And for all we know, the first sessions have already taken place. They may have taken place in the 1800s, the 1900s. We don't know. You don't know how long it's supposed to go for or how many sessions. So that could be the case. There may be those that have been in the first sessions of Adam on Diamond that have seen Christ. But in addition to that, I'm doing this spreadsheet called Quotes, Visions, and Visitations. It's a timeline of visions, visitations, dreams, near-death experiences, and of life experiences where people are visited by those on the other side of the veil. And so far, with what I've collected, the person that shows up the most is Jesus Christ. And so after Joseph Smith made this prophecy in 1843, the next time that we see Christ is in the Salt Lake Temple when he visited Lorenzo Snow. The synopsis that I have here is Jesus Christ appears to Lorenzo Snow and instructs him to reorganize the first presidency of the church at once and not wait, as had been done with previous presidents. He instructs him to call President George Q. Cannon and Joseph F. Smith as counselors. Okay, so this is the next time that we see Christ, at least from what I've recorded. I'm sure I'm missing many accounts. I'm working on it, but to my knowledge, this is the next time that we see Christ is with President Lorenzo Snow in 1898. Okay. And I haven't gone through to see when he was born, but I wouldn't be surprised if he's part of that generation that Joseph Smith is talking about. And then aside from that, if we find the more recent appearances of Christ, I think I just have one or two other ones. There's this account that we read in President David O. McKay's diaries, where a member of the church, Lorraine Cravens, had sent him a letter where she had attended the dedication of the Los Angeles, California temple, and she had a vision where she saw God the Father, Jesus Christ, Moses, like as it was being dedicated, she like saw this behind David O. McKay, and he sent it to her, or she sent it to him, and he kept it. I think that he believed what she was saying. So Jesus Christ was there. This was 1956. And then, oh yeah, and then we have this near-death experience of Elder David B. Haight of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. In that near-death experience, he saw Christ. He saw Christ's life in panoramic view. It's really kind of stunning. He shared this in General Conference. So even if I were to collect all the different accounts of all visions, visitations that are currently recorded somewhere, if I was to collect all those, undoubtedly there would be many more that have not been recorded or have not been published. So it very well could be that his prophecy has already been fulfilled in these appearances. I just don't know. Okay, so let's go back to this. So I highlighted Sister Andre, also known as Lucille Randon of France, who passed away at the age of 118. This is something else that I'm keeping an eye on. The reason why is because when President Nelson turned 98, here he is right here, President Nelson, this is when he became the oldest living prophet or apostle of this dispensation. The day before his birthday, when this happened, Queen Elizabeth II, who was the longest reigning British monarch, passed away. And I thought that was so strange and so unusual. But then we started noticing all these other longest living, longest serving, longest reigning, whatever, presidents and prime ministers of all these countries. So we have the Soviet Union, just a month before Queen Elizabeth passed away. You have Japan. That's the first one that I have in this series. Shinzo Abe, Japan's longest serving prime minister. And then we have China, we have Hawaii, we have soccer. And the reason why I have that is because for some people, entertainment and sports is their god. It's their idol. So if you have the king of soccer that passes away, that's going to affect some people. But we're talking about Lucille Randon right now. And what's interesting is that Pope Emeritus Benedict the 16th he was the longest living pope of the Catholic Church. That's a long time. The longest living pope passed away on New Year's Eve, 2022. And then 17 days later, the longest living nun of all time, Lucille Randon, passed away. And so the way that I view this is that this is just simply a sign for those that are watching. It's a sign that this old order is going the way of the earth, that it's making way for the millennium when Christ will be the only king. He will rule and reign, and the kingdom of God is going to be fully established, not just the ecclesiastical, but also the political kingdom of God. And so contrasting all these people with President Nelson, who's still going on and he's surviving all of them, I feel like there's a symbol in that. And so I feel like the last one to complete this list would be the President of the United States. And we're currently watching Jimmy Carter. He's still alive. He's the longest living president or former president of the United States. And what's interesting about him is that he was born just a month after President Nelson. He was born October 1st, 1924. President Nelson was born September 9th, 1924. And Jimmy Carter is currently in hospice care. So he is on his way out. Don't know when it's going to happen, but it makes sense that the United States would be the last one in this series. I have these 3 American flags, but these represent the different branches of government, like the legislative and the judicial, right? And then you have Henry Kissinger, which would be the executive, but he wasn't. Anyway, I just thought it was notable, so I put him down. But anyway, the real big one would be Jimmy Carter. I have this pulled up. This is the latest update. Former U.S. President Carter, nearing 100, excited to vote for Harris, grandson says. Okay, let's read what it says here. Former U.S. President Jimmy Carter, 99, is eagerly awaiting his chance to cast a ballot for Democratic presidential candidate Kamala Harris this fall, even as he approaches his 100th birthday, his grandson said on Wednesday. Quote from his grandson. He's super aware. Just recently, we were talking about his 100th birthday, and he said, yeah, I'm excited about that, but I'm really excited to vote for Kamala Harris, end quote. The former peanut farmer and nuclear submarine officer, that's quite the contrast, from Georgia, has lived long after his 4-year term in office. Longer after his 4-year term in office than any other U.S. president. He will turn 100 on October 1st, 6 days before the southern state starts mailing out absentee ballots. Early in-person voting starts on October 15th. It's just kind of interesting, you guys, because we were just talking about the first ever election day blood moon, and I think everybody would agree that that's not a good sign. The first time in our nation's history that there's a blood moon, something called a blood moon on election day. It happened in 2022. And I feel like it's a sign preceding whatever happens this year in 2024. And here we're talking about the oldest living president excited to vote, this year. It's interesting times. Continuing, the Carter Center, led by his grandson, is planning a centennial celebration for the former president next month in Atlanta. Quote, his body is very physically diminished, but he's doing well. So this right here is the latest that we've heard about Jimmy Carter. His body is very physically diminished, but he's doing well. He's sort of remarkably engaged in these moments and is excited about the prospects that we have to sort of turn the page on this era, which is an interesting thing to say as we're talking about this era, all these people representing this era before the second coming. Anyway, and is excited about the prospects that we have to sort of turn the page on this era that we've been living in with Donald Trump as sort of a constant presence in our politics. So there you have it. I think it's going to be a very interesting rest of the year. And if the second coming hasn't happened by then, next year is probably going to be even more interesting. But we're waiting to see what happens with this as we watch both President Nelson and President Carter reach their 100th birthday together. It's very interesting. Okay, the last thing that I want to talk about, if we go back to this spreadsheet, you'll notice that I have Israel in columns G and H. And the reason why I have that, so let's go to the beginning. So Israel became a nation May 14th of 1948, just after World War II. And right now, Israel is 76 years old. And interestingly, and this may be significant or maybe not, but next year it's going to turn 77, which I think that's significant. But anyway, right now it's 76, and it's been a while since I've talked about this, but there's this thing called the curse of the 8th decade. So Israel is currently in its 8th decade. It is not yet 80 years old. And there's a quote unquote curse of the 8th decade. So let's go to the Jerusalem Post. 75 years old is a dangerous age for Israel. Opinion. This was written May 1st of last year. And let's find out what this curse is. A few weeks ago, when speaking of Israel's 75th anniversary, President Isaac Herzog worried whether the state would reach 80 years. The presidents, he said, were not encouraging. Of the two Jewish states of antiquity, one split into two parts that never reunited, and the other lost its independence. The quote-unquote united monarchy of Saul, David, and Solomon is said to have lasted not much longer than 100 years. The Hasmonean dynasty ruled in real independence from 140 to 63 BCE when Pompey occupied Jerusalem. 77 years. 77 years. Both were ruined not by foreign enemies, but by domestic infighting comparable to the events of today. 70 to 80 years, plus or minus 2 or 3, has universally been considered the lifespan of 3 generations. Their sequence is thought to follow a regular pattern. The first generation creates, the second maintains, and the third or fourth destroys. Okay, now let's go to Middle East Monitor, the curse of the 8th decade and the end of Israel. This is from May 12th, 2022. Okay, written by Dr. Muhammad Makram Balawi. I had written an article about the belief among a large section of the Palestinians that the second half of the eighth decade of the State of Israel would be the beginning of the end. But it became clear to me that the Israelis also hold, in one way or another, this belief, especially the leaders of Israel, of the Israeli political elite, who take this belief / obsession seriously. Perhaps the first one who spoke in this sense and invoked it from among the prime ministers of Israel was Benjamin Netanyahu, who claimed that his stay as prime minister is the only guarantee for Israel's continuity after its 8th decade and exceeding a century, unlike the history of the Jews, who did not have a state that lasted more than 8 decades. Then, the speech of Naftali Bennett, the current prime minister of Israel, well, at the time that this was written, in his 2020 election campaign, in which he echoed the same sentiments and urged Jewish voters to stand behind the blue and white coalition that he leads, in order to surmount the 8th decade safely and ensure the continuation of the State of Israel after its 80th year. Ehud Barak, the former Prime Minister of Israel, writes to confirm the same complex, the complex of fear for survival. It is important to keep in mind that the people mentioned are not just some rabbis who believe in religious superstitions that have no connection to reality, but rather they are the political leaders of Israel. And then he goes on. And then the last one that I want to read, this is from Tehran Times. And this just kind of this is an interesting perspective as well. This is from July of 2022. And they talk all about it, but what's kind of chilling is this last paragraph. It says, Bennett, with his hollow promises to cut off the octopus's head, went down the drain in a year. Yeah, his service as prime minister didn't last very long. And then Benjamin Netanyahu came back. What will Netanyahu bring for the Israeli settlers who are living in the occupied territories on a borrowed time? Only God knows that, but one thing is sure. The 8th decade curse is working its magic. And, well, all these were written before this war started on October 7th of last year. Right? They were all talking about this curse of the 8th decade. And next year, Israel's going to turn 77. So we're living in a very, very interesting time when it comes to the age of President Nelson, President Carter, the oldest living people in the world, and the State of Israel. All right, well, that's going to be it for this one. So if you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe, like this video if you liked it, leave your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. Also make sure to share it, and I'll talk to you guys later.